Oh,
There were steps.
Good. Good evening, fellow Toastmasters and guests. I'm sure at least some of you have heard of a book that was written about 10 or 15 years ago called The World is Flat. How many people have heard of it? One, two, three, four. Tim? It was written by Thomas Friedman. He's a writer for the New York Times. I never read the book, but I've read articles about the book and the topic in general. And basically, The World is Flat has to do with globalization. And I believe the basic part of the book was, of course, as some of you know, globalization. America, we sent a lot of manufacturing jobs to, say, Mexico or China. And basically what globalization is, as some of these countries pick up our manufacturing and lower skilled jobs, at the same time the U.S. was going to transition to more higher skilled jobs. And everything would even out. It would bring up the economy in China and bring up the American economy, where, say, if a company like Apple shipped their manufacturing jobs to make the phones at a cheap price in China and sell them here, at the same time, it would create a lot of designers and engineers and salespeople. And it would supposedly be a win-win situation for the world as a whole. But what we see today in 2016 is maybe it hasn't been a win-win. If you just look at our economy and what's going on in politics, there's a lot of people that are starting to maybe disagree with the whole conception of globalization and the world is flat. If you look in politics, who's our top two candidates now? You have Trump, who's basically become an anti-free trade person. You have Bernie Sanders, who keeps harping on a lot of the trade deals that Hillary Clinton made, NAFTA and what have you, that they haven't helped American workers. And if you look at the economy in general, it really hasn't been doing that well. And just some statistics say for the last few jobs reports, they've been creating, I don't know how much some of you read the papers, but they've been creating 200,000 jobs a month, which is pretty good. But the economy in this quarter, they say, maybe only grew 0.6%. So the fact is, a lot of the jobs are maybe low-wage jobs. How many kids with college degrees do you see working at Starbucks and a lot of service jobs? So a lot of people are starting to questioning the whole deal, and especially going back to college kids. If globalization really works so well, why would something like 75% of people between the age of 18 and 29 be voting for Bernie Sanders, who's basically saying free trade doesn't work and these trade agreements haven't helped us? Because they must be seeing firsthand that these excellent jobs that we're supposed to be getting in return for outsourcing these other jobs, they're obviously seeing that the jobs aren't there. So just a few other things about corporations and the relationship between corporations and workers. In some ways, this whole free trade, the world is flat, it's kind of like a libertarian type of idea, where libertarians are kind of into not a lot of regulation. And before I continue, I just want to say I'm not against free trade per se in general, but the point of my speech is it's okay to trade. It makes perfect sense, say, if Mexico grows a certain type of food that we don't grow, and they sell it to us, and we sell something that they don't have. That's basically what trade is. But what a lot of globalization has turned into is just, if you're just going to, Ford recently just said they're going to open a factory to produce cars in Mexico. So if you're just going to tear down and this happens a lot in Europe too, where maybe they take down a car factory in England, build a factory in Romania where the workers make less money. It's really what it really is. It's just taking advantage of workers. It's kind of a race to the bottom. Now, a few other things about corporations. A lot of people think what would make free trade work and what would make it be fair is if corporations can regulate themselves. But just a little bit about, we all think of today, we have very high standards for medicines and drugs, and the corporations are in some sense well regulated, but this wasn't always the case. If you will go back to the early 1900s, there was a company that produced cosmetics for women's eyelashes. I believe the beginning of the 20th century. And this is when drugs weren't regulated, and you had women's eyes actually getting blinded because the chemicals were no good. In the 60s, you had a lot of birth defects from certain birth control pills because, again, there wasn't a lot of regulation and testing of drugs. And just recently, we saw the BP Amoco spill. You remember that about 5 years ago in the Gulf of Mexico? I remember it. It was a whole summer of billions of barrels of oil or millions of barrels spewing into the Gulf. And it was everyone was talking about it, and it went on for months. And it was destroying the whole Gulf Coast, and everyone was thinking like the world was going to end. Well, one of the reasons why this happened was because the regulatory agency that was supposed to regulate it was mostly run by people from the very corporations, so they were regulating themselves. So my whole point is, globalization, if it did work, it would have to be work in a way that was fair and that there were laws made to protect people that work for corporations and citizens themselves. In my own case, I've told some of you before, I have an excellent union job. I'm not going to even tell you how much I make, but it's probably twice what the average wages in this country. It's an excellent wage. But my point is, in the 70s, you had a unionization rate in this country for private companies of 30%, and now it's 10%. So a lot of these great manufacturing jobs that existed have been lost, where a lot of the unionization took place. As far as other instances too. I jog a lot around. I live downtown, and you see a lot of homes being built all over the city. Yet the people that work in construction, I'm pretty sure 20 or 30 years ago, they're mostly unionized workers making an excellent wage, or now I'm sure for the most part they're not unionized, and they probably make half the money that they did before. Before I meander, I don't seem to want to meander into different things, but the whole thing that brings this topic together is the fact that in many ways globalization hasn't worked, but at the same time it's something that obviously needs to be done, and the way to do it is the fact that a lot of people think nowadays the world is run by computers, it's run by robots. But the fact is it's still run by people. We still make the laws and the decisions. So if we're going to have globalization and free trade, just like Bernie Sanders and even Trump say that he would rip up these trade deals, it has to work for everybody, for corporations as well as for working people. And just one more thing before I end my speech, a lot of globalization is not good for the environment. If you're tearing down a car company and building it somewhere else, and then shipping the cars back here, isn't that just causing a lot of more pollution and waste as far as transferring the goods back and forth? So these are all questions that need to be raised. So and it also makes economies unstable. What you see now, you see just more instability if working people don't make as much. And just to close my speech, I think instead of saying the world is flat or even not flat, what you can really say is the world is like a boomerang, because you send something one way and it's going to come back in another way that's totally unexpected. So what do you think about that? Thank you.
So John always gives us something to think about.
Next, we're going to have Michelle with speaking strategies.